Alpine and soon-to-be Audi have got to be two of the most confusing and disappointing teams on the grid. They're teams that on the surface have a lot of resources and a lot of potential in terms of what they could become in the future, but the fact is, over the last couple of years, both of them have been in decline and now find themselves as the two worst teams in Formula 1. With that in mind, it got me thinking, if I had to race for either of these underperforming teams for the next 4 or so years, which is a long-term commitment with a major regulation change in the middle to contend with as well, which of these teams would I least want to be a part of? And now, in the short term, that question is pretty easy to answer because whilst Alpine this season have yet again been a chaotic disappointment, especially if you look at how badly they started the season, they did manage to develop their way out of being last and did manage to score points, currently sitting 9th in the Constructors, just 3 points behind Williams. Sauber, on the other hand, have been nothing short of an embarrassment. 18 races into the longest F1 season in the history of the sport, and they are still yet to score a point. Franco Colapinto has been a Formula 1 driver for all but 20 minutes and has already outscored the whole team in just his second ever race. The long term, however, is a much more interesting question because there is aspects of each of these teams that would basically want to make you turn around and run the other way. When it comes to Alpine, it was finally made official that they would ditch their own works engine program in favor of becoming a Mercedes customer when the brand new power unit regulations are introduced in 2026. Now, I have said previously that on paper, this makes total sense. Any Formula 1 car is going to be instantly more competitive with a Mercedes power unit compared to a Renault, and so in essence, you're almost guaranteeing more performance and better competitiveness, which also makes your team more valuable. The Renault power unit has been a headache basically since the start of the hybrid era in 2014. That is why Red Bull was so desperate to leave them for Honda, after which they started to win championships, and even fast forwarding to now, they still have a major performance deficit compared to the other power units. This was particularly a problem for Alpine in 2022 when the engine freeze came in, which in effect meant that Renault weren't able to claw back any engine performance. Even though last year the team did try to activate a mechanism that exists that allows them to unfreeze their engine development to help them close the gap, they ultimately had to abandon that pathway when the other teams and Formula 1 rejected them. And now again, on paper going to Mercedes for the long term should solve all of their problems, but in reality, it deflects from the most important question, which is, why did the Alpine management mismanage their engine division so bad for so long, and why over the course of 10 years with all the money and people that they have, were they not able to solve it? Keep in mind that the Alpine Formula 1 team and the Renault engine division are owned and managed by the same people, which is the overall Renault group. You can't disassociate blame from one side when you own the whole thing. And that is why the poor performance of the engine has been so intrinsically linked to the chaos of the ever-changing management within the Formula 1 team. In choosing to drop their own power unit to become a Mercedes customer, they're essentially admitting that they are incapable of competently running and bringing together two motorsport entities to achieve success. Whereas teams like Aston Martin with Honda, Red Bull with Ford, and even in the context of this video, Sauber with Audi, are pushing themselves to become championship-winning manufacturer teams, Alpine just seems like they're happy to do the bare minimum without understanding why they can't achieve more success. It's important to remember that Alpine is actually one of the biggest teams on the grid in terms of personnel, rivaling teams like Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes. Almost 1,000 people are working at Enstone, which in comparison to Sauber, has half the amount of people working at their Swiss factory in Hinwil. When you compare that to a team like Haas, which is the smallest team on the grid with only 300 people, it really puts it into perspective that the number of people you have isn't necessarily proportional to your success on track, but it does emphasize just how much Alpine have been under-delivering with the people that they have already. It's never just a case of always getting bigger with more people, a bigger factory, and that success will automatically follow. That's not to say that scaling up isn't important, because we know that Audi is going through a big recruitment drive, and even Haas have recently announced a partnership with Toyota that will also bring in more people as well. But Alpine have almost reached the top of that scaling curve already. They don't need more people. They need better management to make sure that they're getting the best out of who they have already, and there lies the problem in having any kind of faith in this team going forward. If you choose to trust Alpine with the next 4 years of your career in your absolute prime, then what you're essentially saying is that you trust the combination of Luca Di Maio, Flavio Briatore and Oliver Oaks to get the best out of what they already have. And now Oliver Oaks is so new and so unproven in Formula 1 that I think it's important to give him the benefit of the doubt. But when you look at Briatore and especially Di Maio, they have sacked countless team principals, including one this season which was Flavio's first big decision. They have admitted that they are incapable of running their own engine program, and they are also very clearly more motivated by the team's commercial potential rather than their on-track potential. And now, none of this is to say that Sauber/Audi give me any more faith in them over Alpine. The one thing that Sauber had over Alpine is that at least their management looked like it was clear and stable, but now even that is gone. When Andreas Seidel left McLaren in late 2022 and also eventually signed ex-McLaren technical director James Key along with him as well, it seemed like they were the two pillars of Audi's future. Fast forward a year and a half later, which is still a year and a half away from the team becoming Audi, Seidel has been booted out in favour of Mattia Binotto, and looking at just how bad the car is and the fact that they have failed to develop their way out of being last, I think it's fair to say that if this car doesn't improve at the start of next season, then James Key's days are also going to be numbered as well. It's also important to remember that Nico Hülkenberg was a Seidel hire. Together they won the Le Mans 24 Hours in 2015 with the Porsche hypercar team, and it was that relationship which was clearly a very big factor in Seidel attracting Nico to Audi. Binotto is now in a situation where whoever he chooses to partner alongside Nico will be his guy, and it's going to be a real test of his leadership skills to make sure that the relationship between him and both of his drivers is a strong one, given that Nico Hülkenberg is a consequence of the previous regime. All of these cracks could have been papered over this season had the team been competitive, but they have been embarrassing. Bottas and Zhou are by no means the greatest driver pairing in the world, but they are also not as bad as this team is making them look. Zhou is a perfectly competent Formula 1 driver, and Valtteri, as we saw at the start of 2022 at Alfa Romeo, was one of the best drivers in the midfield when he was given a point-scoring car. And yet this team is making both of them look as if they are useless. From the beginning of the season, a basic wheel nut manufacturing error caused them to have horrendous race-ruining pit stops. And not only did the car start the season uncompetitive, but the team throughout 18 races has also failed to develop it to a point where it can challenge for points. That in particular I think has been really concerning because this is now a trend with this team. In early 22, Alfa Romeo had arguably the best car in the midfield when they were the only team to be below the weight limit, but throughout the past 3 years, they have failed to either stay competitive or actually overtake the other teams mid-season by out-developing them. The arrival of Audi is being seen as this utopia of just how good this team is going to become, but just because you stick an Audi badge on a Sauber doesn't mean it's going to magically become competitive. This team needs to improve as Sauber first and foremost, because the moment that it becomes Audi, that's going to instantly bring with it even bigger expectations and even more pressure. The fact that they haven't been able to build a competitive chassis and aero concept makes me really nervous, because then also trying to integrate a brand new and unproven power unit into that as well just screams of a disaster waiting to happen. Despite the fair criticism that he received in 2022 from people like me, I really do think that Mattia Binotto, with his experience of making Ferrari competitive again, especially during his time as technical director in 2017, 18, and even when he was the team principal in 2019, he will understand what it's going to take to make this team respectable again, from the technical side to the engine integration side, and even on the strategy side. If you look at what Lawrence Stroll has done at Aston Martin as a counterpoint, He's started from a much higher base with Racing Point and has done everything right, bringing in championship caliber drivers, incredible recruitment, building a world-class factory, acquiring Works Honda engines for 26, and yet despite that, Aston Martin are still only in the midfield. That is how hard Formula 1 is, even when you do everything right. Sauber definitely has more potential than Alpine, given how much more room they have for growth over the next 4 years, but given that they've had great facilities and decent funding already, and have still been overtaken by teams like Haas and RB, it clearly shows that they have been under-delivering relative to what they have, and worst of all, they show no signs yet of knowing how to turn things around. It's clear that both of these teams have a lot of weaknesses in a lot of key areas, which is what makes it difficult to decide which one is actually worse if you look at it from a long-term point of view, rather than just the next year or two. If I had to choose which team I think is worse and which team I think I'd least like to be a part of for the next 4 years, I still think it's Sauber/Audi. I guess the ultimate indictment on just how bad these teams are is actually quite simple. Carlos Sainz. Unlike me, he actually did have to make a decision between these teams, and there's no doubt that a driver as smart as Carlos Sainz negotiated and did his due diligence with all of his available options, including Alpine and Audi, and the fact that he landed on Williams as the place that he wants to be for the future over the other two, that to me speaks volumes about how much faith he had in them. However, now it's over to you. Which of these teams do you think you'd least like to be a part of for the foreseeable future? Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe, that would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.